When I found my daughter scrubbing the driveway of the $2.5 million mansion I bought for her trust fund, she did not hug me. She did not smile. She looked at me with the terrified eyes of a stranger and asked if I was the debt collector. My son-in-law pulled up in a sports car paid for with my money, threw a crumpled $5 bill at my chest and told me to get off his property before he called the police. He did not know, he just tipped the man who owns the very ground he stands on. I did not yell. I simply picked up my phone and called my lawyer. It is time for justice. If you have ever been erased by the people you sacrificed everything for, like this video and subscribe. My name is Desmond Carter. I am 69 years old. For 15 years, I have been a ghost. I worked as a chief engineer in diamond mines across Africa, living in shadows and silence for security reasons. I sent every cent I earned back to America. I sent it to my only daughter, Nia. I sent it to ensure she would live like a queen. I came home today expecting a reunion. Instead, I walked into a crime scene. I stood before the heavy iron gates of the estate in the Hamptons. The GPS on my phone confirmed this was the address, but my eyes refused to believe it. This was supposed to be a sanctuary. When I signed the deed 15 years ago, the lawn was a pristine carpet of green velvet. Now weeds choked the rose bushes my late wife Beatrice loved so much. The paint on the west wing was peeling, revealing gray concrete underneath like an exposed bone. The fountain in the center of the driveway was dry, filled with dead leaves and trash. This was not the home of a wealthy heiress. This looked like a house that had been bled dry. I adjusted the collar of my bespoke Italian suit, ensuring the label was hidden. I needed to see the truth before I revealed my identity. I pressed the intercom button. Silence. I pressed it again. Nothing. The security system I had paid $50,000 to install was dead. I pushed the side gate. It squeaked open, unlocked, and rusted. I walked up the long driveway, my heart hammering against my ribs. I saw a figure near the garage. A woman was on her hands and knees scrubbing a grease stain on the pavement with a small brush. She wore a gray uniform that was 2 sizes too big, stained with bleach and old sweat. Her hair, once thick and braided with pride, was matted and hidden under a cheap scarf. I stopped 10 feet away. The woman stopped scrubbing. She stayed on the ground, keeping her head lowered, her posture submissive like a beaten animal waiting for a blow. "Excuse me," I said. My voice was rough from the flight and the emotion. "I am looking for Nia Carter." The woman flinched. She dropped the brush. Slowly she lifted her head. The air left my lungs. It was her. It was Nia. But the light was gone from her eyes. She was 35, but she looked 50. Her hands were rough, the knuckles swollen and cracked. She looked at me, but there was no recognition in her gaze. There was only fear. Pure, distilled terror. "Sir, you cannot be here," she whispered, scrambling backward on her knees. "The master does not allow strangers. If he sees you, I will lose my break time. Please, you have to leave." The master. The word tasted like ash in my mouth. I took a step forward, reaching out a hand. "Nia, baby, look at me. It is Dad. It is Desmond." She stared at me blankly. Her eyes darted to the front door, then back to me. Her breathing became shallow and fast. "My father is dead," she said, her voice trembling. "He died in a mining accident 10 years ago." Blake showed me the death certificate. He showed me the letter from the company. "You are confused, sir. Or you are one of Blake's creditors. Please, we do not have any money today. He promised he would pay next week. Just do not hurt him. If you hurt him, he takes it out on me." I froze. A mining accident. A death certificate. The pieces of the puzzle slammed into place with violent force. Blake Sterling, the man she married right before I left, had not just spent my money. He had killed me. He had erased my existence to control my daughter. He had intercepted my letters, my emails, and he had fabricated a lie so complete that my own child looked at my living face and saw a ghost. "Nia, I am not dead," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, trying not to frighten her further. "I never stopped writing to you. I sent you money every month. Millions, Nia." She shook her head frantically, covering her ears. "Stop it. Stop lying. Blake said people would come. He said scammers would try to trick me because I am sick. He says my mind is broken. He says I make things up. Please just go. If the car comes and you are here, he will lock me in the basement again." The basement. My hands clenched into fists so tight my fingernails cut into my palms. I looked at this broken woman, this shell of the brilliant, vibrant girl who used to play piano and dream of being an architect. She was not sick. She was brainwashed. She was a prisoner in the house I bought to set her free. Before I could say another word, the roar of an engine cut through the afternoon silence. A red sports car tore through the open gate tires, screeching on the pavement. It swerved aggressively, stopping inches from where I stood. The door flew open. Blake Sterling stepped out. He had aged, but not well. His face was puffy from alcohol, his stomach spilling over the belt of his designer jeans. He wore sunglasses that cost more than a car payment, but his shoes were scuffed. He smelled of stale bourbon and expensive cologne. He didn't look at me. He looked straight at Nia. "What is this?" he roared, his face turning a violent shade of red. "I leave for 2 hours to handle business, and I come back to find you lounging on the ground talking to bums. Is the driveway clean? Did you finish the oil stain?" Nia cowered, curling into a ball on the asphalt. "I am sorry, Blake. I am sorry. He just walked in. I told him to leave. I was working, I promise." Blake turned to me then. He lowered his sunglasses, looking me up and down with a sneer of absolute disgust. He saw a 69-year-old black man in a suit standing in his driveway. He did not see a father. He did not see a threat. He saw a nuisance. He saw someone beneath him. "Who are you?" Blake barked. "A gardener. A delivery driver." I told the agency I did not want any more old-timers. "You people are too slow." I looked him in the eye. "I am not the gardener," I said. My voice was low, dangerous. "I am here to see Nia." Blake laughed. It was a dry, cruel sound. "You want to see the help?" "She is busy. She has a debt to work off. You know how it is. These people borrow money, blow it on nonsense, and then cry when it is time to pay up. I am generous enough to let her work it off here instead of sending her to jail." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a crumpled $5 bill. He balled it up and threw it at me. It hit my chest and fell to the ground between us. "Here," he said. "Buy yourself a sandwich and get off my property. If you are still here in 3 minutes, I am calling the cops. And trust me, old man around here, they listen to me, not you." He turned back to Nia and kicked the scrub brush toward her. "Get back to work. And tonight you are sleeping in the laundry room. I do not want to see your face until this place shines." Blake walked toward the front door without looking back. He slammed it shut, the sound echoing like a gunshot. Nia scrambled for the brush, her tears falling silently onto the pavement. She looked up at me one last time, her eyes begging me to leave, begging me to save myself. "Go," she mouthed silently. "Please." I looked at the $5 bill on the ground. I looked at the peeling paint of the mansion. I looked at my daughter reduced to a slave in her own inheritance. A cold calm settled over me. It was the same calm I felt when I handled explosives in the mines. One wrong move and everything blows up. But execute the plan perfectly and you can move mountains. I did not pick up the money. I did not storm the door. I did not scream. I memorized the license plate of the sports car. I noted the brand of the security cameras that were clearly disconnected. I engraved the image of my daughter's fear into my soul. I turned around and walked back down the driveway. I walked out the rusted gate. I walked until I was around the corner out of sight. Then I pulled out my satellite phone. I dialed a number I had not used in years. "Steinberg," I said when the line connected. "Desmond," the voice on the other end sounded shocked. "We thought you were dead." The reports were wrong. I cut him off. "Listen to me carefully. I want you to activate the Ghost Protocol. I need you to buy every single debt attached to the name Blake Sterling. I want his mortgage, his car loans, his credit card debt, his gambling markers. I want it all." There was a pause. "Desmond, that is millions of dollars of bad debt. The man is a financial black hole. I do not care about the profit," I said. "I am not buying his debt to make money. I am buying it to own him." And Steinberg, "Yes, Desmond. Get me a background check on a woman named Crystal and find out which doctor signed my death certificate. I am going to bury them all." I hung up the phone. The sun was setting over the Hamptons, casting long shadows across the manicured lawns of the neighbors. My daughter was in that house, believing she was alone, believing she was broken. She did not know that the cavalry had just arrived, and the cavalry was not bringing a rescue team. The cavalry was bringing a war. I hailed a taxi and gave the driver the address of the most expensive hotel in the city. I needed a shower. I needed a suit that wasn't covered in travel dust. And then I needed to become someone else. Desmond Carter, the billionaire engineer, was officially dead. Tomorrow, a new man would walk through those gates, a man who needed a job, a man who looked like a beggar but struck like a viper. Blake Sterling wanted a gardener. I would give him the best gardener he ever had. I would clear the weeds, I would dig the holes, and when the time was right, I would bury him in one of them. The investigator arrived at my hotel suite at exactly midnight. He did not knock. He simply texted that he was outside. I opened the door to a man who looked like he had not slept in a week. He carried a thick leather briefcase that smelled of stale tobacco and rain. He placed it on the glass coffee table and looked at me with eyes that had seen too much darkness. "Mr. Carter," he said, his voice gravelly, "you are going to want a drink for this." "I do not drink," I replied, sitting opposite him. "Just show me what you found." He opened the briefcase and slid a single piece of paper across the cold glass. It was a death certificate. It had my name on it. Desmond Carter. Date of death, October 14th, 2014. Cause of death, structural collapse in a diamond mine in Angola. Body never recovered. I stared at the paper. The stamp looked official. The signature belonged to a coroner I had never met. For 10 years, while I was breathing, working, and sweating in the mines to build a future for my family, my daughter believed I was buried under 1,000 tons of rock. "Where did he get this?" I asked, my voice dangerously calm. "He paid a forger in Cape Town $5,000, the investigator replied. "He presented this to Nia a week after your letters stopped coming. He told her the company was covering it up to avoid a lawsuit. He told her you died alone and in pain." I felt a vein throb in my temple. And Nia. How did she take it? The investigator hesitated. He reached into the folder and pulled out a photograph. It was a surveillance shot taken through a window 10 years ago. It showed Nia sitting on the floor of an empty room clutching a teddy bear I had given her when she was 5. She looked broken. "She did not just grieve, Mr. Carter," the investigator said softly. "She broke. She went to the embassy every single day for 6 months begging them to find your body. She cried so much and so hard that she suffered a retinal detachment in her left eye." I froze. Her eye. I remembered seeing her at the gate earlier that day. She had kept her head down. She had seemed clumsy on her left side. Blake told her it was just stress, the investigator continued. He refused to pay for the surgery. He said it was a waste of money for a dead man's daughter. "Nia is blind in her left eye, Mr. Carter. Permanent vision loss because your son-in-law wanted to save a few $1,000s while he was sitting on your fortune." The glass of water in my hand shattered. I did not realize I was squeezing it until the shards dug into my palm. Blood dripped onto the carpet, dark and heavy. I did not feel the pain. The physical pain was nothing compared to the rage burning a hole through my chest. My daughter was partially blind because of this man. "Show me the money," I commanded, ignoring the blood running down my hand. The investigator nodded and spread out a series of bank statements. They were complex, layered with shell companies and offshore accounts, but I was an engineer. I understood structure, I understood flow. "You sent $3 million over the last 15 years, the investigator explained, tracing a line on the spreadsheet. "You thought it was going into the Carter family trust. It was not." Blake set up a dummy corporation with a nearly identical name. "Where is it?" I asked. "Is it in the house? Is it in bonds?" "It is gone," the investigator said bluntly. "Gone. $3 million does not just vanish. It does when you have a gambling addiction and a taste for vintage European cars," he replied. "Blake Sterling is a VIP at 3 underground casinos in Atlantic City. He has lost over $2 million at the roulette tables. The rest. He bought a fleet of vintage Porsches. He keeps them in a climate-controlled garage in Jersey. He pays more for the air conditioning in that garage than he does for the food in your daughter's pantry." I looked at the numbers. Dates and amounts. Transfers made on days when Nia was likely starving. Withdrawals made on the day my grandson was born and subsequently given up for adoption because Blake said they could not afford a child. That was another secret the investigator dropped on me casually. Nia had been pregnant 5 years ago. Blake forced her to give the baby up. He told her a maid could not raise a child. I stood up and walked to the window. The city lights of New York glittered below me, indifferent and cold. My daughter had lost her sight, her child, and her father, and she was servicing the man who took it all. "Why does she stay?" I asked the reflection in the glass. "If the money is gone, if he is abusive, why does she stay? She is a Carter. She has my blood. She is strong. The investigator cleared his throat. "This is the worst part, Mr. Carter." He pulled out a final document. It was a contract, a loan agreement. Blake did not just steal the money, he explained. He convinced Naya that he lost his own fortune trying to find your body. He told her he spent millions hiring rescue teams and private mercenaries to search the mines in Angola. He produced fake invoices. He showed her bills for helicopters and excavation equipment that never existed. I turned back to the table, my stomach churning. "He made her sign this." The investigator pointed to the signature at the bottom. "It is a confession of debt." He convinced her that she is responsible for his financial ruin. He told her that because the search was for her father, the debt is hers. He legally structured it so that she owes him $4 million. She is working as his maid, not because she is weak, but because she thinks she is paying off the cost of your failed rescue. She thinks she is honoring your memory by serving him. The room fell silent. The air conditioning hummed, sounding like a distant drill in a mine. The cruelty was elegant. It was precise. It was engineering applied to human suffering. Blake Sterling had turned my love for my daughter into a weapon and used it to enslave her. He did not just break her heart, I whispered. He monetized her grief. I looked at the clock. It was 2 a.m. The banks were closed. The courts were closed. But justice does not sleep. I picked up my satellite phone. I dialed Steinberg's private line. He answered on the first ring. He knew better than to ignore a call from me, especially now. "Steinberg," I said. My voice was no longer the voice of a father. It was the voice of a man who used to negotiate with warlords to keep my mines open. "I am listening," Desmond the lawyer replied. "I want you to execute a purchase order immediately," I said. "I want you to buy the debt." "Which debt?" Steinberg asked. "All of it," I said. "I want you to contact the banks holding the mortgage on the Hamptons house. I want you to contact the lenders holding the notes on his sports cars. I want you to find the bookies in Atlantic City holding his gambling markers. Pay them whatever they want. Offer them 20% over the principal if they sell tonight. I want to be the sole creditor of Blake Sterling by sunrise." Desmond Steinberg warned buying illegal gambling debt is risky. We have to route it through the holding company in the Caymans. It will cost you a fortune in fees. "I do not care about the fees," I snapped. "I want to own the shirt on his back. I want to own the fork he eats with. I want to own the bed he sleeps in while my daughter sleeps on the floor." "Can you do it?" There was a pause. I heard the clicking of a keyboard. "I can have the mortgage and the car loans by 9 a.m., Steinberg said. "The gambling debt will take a bit of leverage, but I know people. We will have it all by noon." "Good," I said. And Steinberg, "Yes, draft an eviction notice. But do not serve it yet. I want it ready. I want the date blank. When I give the signal, I want him on the street in 10 minutes. Consider it done." I hung up the phone. The investigator was watching me, a look of grim satisfaction on his face. "Is there anything else, Mr. Carter?" he asked. "Yes," I said. "You mentioned a woman named Crystal, the one who lives in the house." The investigator nodded. "Crystal Vance. She is listed as the house manager. In reality, she is an escort Blake met in Vegas 3 years ago. She runs the house. She is the one who gives Nia her daily orders. She enjoys it. I have footage of her kicking a bucket of dirty water over a floor Nia just cleaned. I felt the blood on my palm dry and tighten the skin. Find out everything about her I ordered. Find out where she came from. Find out what she is hiding. People like that always have skeletons. I want to rattle them." The investigator closed his briefcase. "I will have a file by morning." He left the room, leaving me alone with the ghosts of the last 15 years. I looked at the death certificate again. Desmond Carter, deceased. Blake Sterling was right about one thing. The nice, gentle father who left 15 years ago was dead. He died the moment I saw my daughter on her knees scrubbing that pavement. The man who returned was something else entirely. I walked into the bathroom and washed the blood off my hand. I looked at my face in the mirror. Gray beard, deep lines, eyes that had seen diamonds pulled from the mud. I needed to change. I needed to shed this skin of wealth and power. I opened the closet where I had asked the hotel concierge to place the items I requested. A pair of worn denim overalls, a faded flannel shirt, work boots scuffed with sandpaper, a hat stained with sweat. I stripped off my Italian suit. I put on the costume of the beggar. I looked at myself. I looked like a man who had lost everything. I looked like a man who could be ignored. abused, and discarded. Perfect. Tomorrow, I would walk back through those iron gates, not as the owner, but as the help. I would let Blake Sterling spit on me again. I would let Crystal Vance mock me. I would watch them torture my daughter with my own eyes. I needed to witness the full extent of their crimes. I needed to gather the evidence that would send them to prison for the rest of their natural lives. And I needed to get close to Nia. I needed to whisper the truth to her when no one was listening. I needed to wake her up before I burned their world down. I turned off the lights in the suite. I did not sleep. I sat in the dark waiting for the sun to rise. The hunter was patient, and the trap was set. Blake Sterling thought he was the master of his domain. He did not know that he had just hired his executioner. I adjusted the collar of the rough flannel shirt and smeared a thick layer of engine grease across my cheekbones. In the mirror of the hotel suite, Desmond Carter, the wealthy engineer, dissolved. In his place stood a man defeated by gravity and time. I practiced the slump of the shoulders, the gaze that fixed on the floor rather than the eye. I was ready. I took the subway to the industrial district, to the small labor agency Steinberg had acquired quietly in the early hours of the morning. The manager, a man named Russo, who knew better than to ask why a billionaire was dressing like a vagrant, handed me a slip of paper. "You are confirmed," Russo said, keeping his eyes on his desk. "The Sterling estate needs a day laborer for groundskeeping and event prep. You report to the side gate at 800 hours. I took the paper. My hands were rough, my fingernails deliberately dirtied. I walked out into the gray morning light. The commute to the Hamptons usually took 2 hours by train and bus. I took the route the help took. I sat on the hard plastic seats surrounded by women in Maid uniforms and men with calloused hands, the invisible army that kept the mansions shining. When I arrived at the estate, the iron gates loomed over me like the jaws of a beast. Yesterday, I had stood here in a $3,000 suit demanding entry. Today, I stood in worn work boots waiting to be buzzed in. The humiliation was a physical weight pressing down on my chest. I had to press the intercom button and announce myself as the new gardener. I had to wait for 5 minutes while they verified my existence. When the gate finally clicked open, I did not stride in. I shuffled. I kept my head down. I was entering my own kingdom as a serf. Blake Sterling was waiting on the wraparound porch. He wore a white linen suit and held a tablet, tapping furiously. He didn't look up when I approached the steps. He let me stand there in the sun for a full minute, a power move designed to remind me of my place. "You the agency guy?" He finally asked, his eyes still on the screen. "Yes, sir," I mumbled, affecting a slight rasp in my voice. "Name is Moss." Blake looked up then. His gaze slid over me with an indifference that was more insulting than hatred. He didn't see a man. He saw a tool, a cheap, disposable tool. "You look older than the picture," he said, wrinkling his nose as if I smelled. "I specifically asked for someone with stamina. We have a gala tonight, and this place looks like a dump." "I can work, sir," I said, staring at his expensive loafers. "I am strong." Blake laughed, a short barking sound. "Yeah, I bet. You people always say that until it is time to actually sweat. Then it is all back pain and breaks. Listen to me, Moss. I am paying you minimum wage and I expect maximum effort. You screw up, you are out. No second chances." He walked down the steps and pointed toward the east wing of the garden. "You see that rose garden?" he asked. I looked. It was a sprawling, tangled mass of bushes. My wife Beatrice had planted them 20 years ago. They were her pride. She used to spend hours pruning them, singing to them. They were overgrown now, wild and fierce, but they were still hers. "Yes, sir," I said, a lump forming in my throat. "Get rid of them," Blake ordered. I froze. "Get rid of them." "Dig them up," he said, waving his hand dismissively. "All of them. My fiancée Crystal hates them. She says they look like old lady flowers. She wants exotic palms planted there before the guests arrive at 7. Tear them out, roots and all. He wanted me to destroy the last living piece of my wife. He wanted me to erase her memory to please his mistress. The rage flared hot and white behind my eyes. I wanted to grab him by his linen lapels and throw him into the thorns. I wanted to scream that he wasn't fit to walk on the same earth Beatrice had walked on. But I forced the fire down. I swallowed the bile. "Yes, sir," I said. "I will take care of it." "Good," Blake said, turning back to the house. "And do not track dirt on the patio. I just had it power washed." I walked to the tool shed and grabbed a heavy spade and a pair of shears. I stood before the roses. They were beautiful in their wildness. I touched a red bloom, its petals soft against my rough fingers. I whispered an apology to Beatrice. Then I began to dig. I swung the pickaxe, driving it into the soil. I tore at the roots. I ripped the branches that snagged my clothes and tore my skin. I bled. Physical blood mixed with the dirt. I destroyed the garden to save the house. Every strike was a promise. I would replant this garden over Blake's financial grave. By noon, my back was screaming and the roses were a pile of green and red debris. I was hauling the last of the branches to the compost heap when I heard a commotion from the kitchen window. It was open, the screen removed for cleaning. I moved closer, hugging the brick wall, blending into the shadows of the ivy. I peered inside. The kitchen was chaotic. Catering staff were prepping for the party, but in the center of the room, the dynamic was different. Crystal was there. She wore a silk kimono and held a glass of champagne. She was leaning against the granite island, watching Nia. Nia was at the stove, stirring a large pot of bisque. She looked exhausted, her face pale, her movements jerky. "It is taking too long," Crystal complained, her voice shrill. "Blake wants lunch now. It is almost ready," Miss Crystal, Nia said softly. "It just needs to simmer for 2 more minutes." Crystal rolled her eyes. "I do not have 2 minutes. I have a stylist coming. Give me a bowl. Now." Nia hurried. She ladled the thick orange soup into a porcelain bowl. She placed it on a saucer and set it down in front of Crystal with trembling hands. Crystal picked up the spoon, blew on it theatrically, and took a tiny sip. She spat it back into the bowl immediately. "Ugh," she shrieked. "It is freezing. Are you trying to poison me with cold soup?" "It was boiling, Miss Crystal," Nia said, her eyes widening in fear. "I just took it off the fire." "Do not lie to me," Crystal yelled. She grabbed the bowl. I watched, paralyzed by the sudden violence. Crystal didn't throw the soup on the floor. She didn't push it away. She tilted the bowl and poured the steaming, thick liquid directly over Nia's hand that was resting on the counter. Nia didn't scream. That was the horror of it. She made a small, choked sound like a wounded bird. She yanked her hand back, cradling it against her chest. The skin turned an angry, blistered red instantly. Tears squeezed out of her eyes, running down her cheeks in silent tracks. "I am sorry," Nia whispered, her voice breaking. "I am sorry, Miss Crystal. I will heat it up. Please forgive me." She was apologizing. She was apologizing for being burned. Crystal smirked, picking up a napkin to dab a speck of soup from her silk sleeve. "You are clumsy, Nia," she said coldly. "And you are slow. Clean up this mess before Blake sees it. He hates it when you are messy." I stood outside the window, my hand gripping the stone sill so hard the brick bit into my skin. My entire body was vibrating. I wanted to crash through that window. I wanted to shatter the world. But I didn't. With a shaking hand, I reached into the pocket of my overalls and pulled out the micro camera Steinberg had given me. I aimed it through the window. I recorded Nia sobbing silently as she wiped up the soup with her uninjured hand. I recorded Crystal laughing as she walked out of the room with her champagne. I recorded the evidence of their cruelty. I recorded the fuel for my fire. I lowered the camera. I leaned my forehead against the rough brick wall and closed my eyes. "Hold on, baby girl," I whispered into the darkness. "Just hold on. Daddy is here, and the monsters are about to learn what it means to be afraid of the dark." I waited until the roar of the sports car faded down the long driveway. Blake had left to pick up a tuxedo for the gala, and Crystal was upstairs engaging in her daily ritual of beauty treatments. The house was momentarily unguarded. I slipped off my work boots by the back door, moving in my socks to silence my footsteps. Walking into the kitchen felt like stepping into a mausoleum. The surfaces were polished, marble cold, and uninviting. This was the heart of the home where I used to make pancakes on Sunday mornings. Now it was a sterile laboratory where my daughter was being dismantled. I went straight to the cabinet above the coffee maker. I had watched Blake earlier through the window. He always reached there before giving Nia her morning drink. I opened the door. It was lined with high-end supplements and organic teas, a facade of health. But in the back, hidden behind a tin of protein powder, was a small amber bottle. I pulled it down. The label was handwritten in Blake's jagged script. "Vitamins for Nia. 1 daily." I unscrewed the cap and shook a few pills into my rough palm. They were small, blue, and innocent looking. But I knew better. I had spent years in mining camps where doctors used strong sedatives to keep injured men from screaming. I recognized the marking stamped on the side. This was not a vitamin. This was a heavy-duty antipsychotic mixed with a sedative, a cocktail designed to sever the connection between memory and reality. My hand shook not from fear, but from a rage so pure it felt like white heat in my veins. He was not just stealing her money. He was stealing her mind. He was chemically erasing her history, her personality, and her sanity, so she would be nothing more than a ghost in her own life. That explained the blank stare. That explained why she did not know me. She was living in a drug-induced fog, a prisoner in a cage made of chemicals. I took a picture of the pills and the bottle with my micro camera. I carefully poured them into a small plastic bag I had brought from the hotel and shoved it deep into my pocket. Then I replaced them with the look-alike sugar pills Steinberg had procured for me. They were identical in shape and color, but harmless. I screwed the cap back on and placed the bottle exactly where I found it. The switch was made. The chemical leash was cut. Now I just had to wait for her mind to wake up. I heard the click of heels on the hardwood floor in the hallway. Crystal. I looked around frantically. There was no time to get back to the door. I slipped into the walk-in pantry and pulled the door shut, leaving a sliver of space to see and hear. Crystal breezed into the kitchen, her silk robe rustling. She was on the phone, her voice high and irritated. Blake walked in a moment later, having returned sooner than I expected. He must have forgotten something. "I cannot stand looking at her anymore, Blake," Crystal hissed, hanging up her call. "She is moping around the garden like a wounded animal. It is depressing. Why can't we just kick her out now, put her on a bus to nowhere?" Blake laughed, the sound of ice cracking. "Patience, babe. We are at the finish line. I need her here for 24 more hours. "Why?" Crystal whined, pouring herself a glass of water. "She is useless. She ruined my lunch. Because the buyer for the house is coming to the gala tomorrow night," Blake explained, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "He is bringing the papers. I need Nia to sign the transfer of the deed. The trust stipulates that only she can authorize the sale of the primary residence." He paused, and I saw him lean against the counter right next to where I was hiding. I could smell his cologne, a cloying scent of musk and money. "I need her pliable," Blake continued. "I need her confused. If we kick her out now, the shock might clear her head. She might start asking questions. But if we keep her here, keep her on the regiment, she will sign whatever I put in front of her. She will think she is signing a birthday card. Once the ink is dry and the wire transfer hits my account in the Caymans, then we dump her. We will drive her to the state asylum and drop her off at the front door. We will tell them she is indigent and delusional, without money, without family, who is going to believe she owns a mansion in the Hamptons." Crystal giggled. It was a dark, ugly sound. "You are wicked, Blake. I love it. So tomorrow night we are free. Tomorrow night we are rich," Blake corrected. "And she is gone forever. Now go get ready. I want you to look like $1 billion when the guests arrive." They left the kitchen, their laughter trailing behind them like toxic smoke. I stood in the dark pantry, my heart hammering against my ribs like a sledgehammer. They were going to discard her like trash. They were going to sell my legacy and throw my daughter into an asylum to rot. I waited 5 minutes to ensure the coast was clear. Then I exited the pantry, slipping out the back door and into the fresh air. I needed to breathe. I needed to wash the filth of their conversation off my skin. I went back to the garden, picking up my shears. I began to trim the hedges near the patio, my movements mechanical. I needed to be close to the house. I needed to be ready. A shadow fell over me. I looked up. Nia was standing there. She held a basket of laundry against her hip. Her eyes were red-rimmed, but there was a flicker of something in them, a spark of curiosity that hadn't been there before. She watched me work for a long moment. I kept my head down, focusing on the leaves, but I was hyper-aware of her presence. "You work hard," she said softly. Her voice was raspy, unused. "It is honest work, ma'am," I replied, keeping my voice gruff. She took a step closer. She tilted her head, studying my profile. The sun was behind me, casting my face in shadow, but she was searching for something. "Do I know you?" she asked. Her brow furrowed, a sign that the gears in her mind were trying to turn through the sludge of the drugs. I stopped cutting. I turned to look at her. I didn't look at her as a servant. I looked at her as a father. I let my guard down for just a second, letting the love and the pain show in my eyes. "I am just the gardener, ma'am," I said. Nia shook her head slowly. "No, you look like him, like who I whispered." "My father," she said. Her voice caught on the word. "He was tall like you. He had broad shoulders. He used to carry me on them when I was little. He had eyes that looked like they knew everything. She dropped the laundry basket. She stepped closer, reaching out a trembling hand as if to touch my face. He died, she whispered, tears spilling over. He died in a hole in the ground. Blake said he left me. Blake said he didn't care enough to come back. I wanted to grab her. I wanted to shake her and tell her that Blake was a liar and a thief. I wanted to hold her and promise her that I never left, that every day I was away was a day I fought to get back to her. But I couldn't. Not yet. If I broke cover now, Blake would call the police. He would have me arrested for trespassing or assault. He would spin a story, and with Nia in this state, she might believe him. I needed her lucid. I needed her to see the truth for herself. I took a step back, gently catching her hand before it touched my cheek. I held it for a moment, my rough, calloused thumb brushing over her knuckles. "Your father never abandoned you, child," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "A man who builds a castle for his princess does not leave her by choice. He is watching you. He is closer than you think." Nia stared at me, her mouth slightly open. The words seemed to strike a chord deep within her, vibrating against the lies Blake had planted. "Closer than I think," she repeated. I reached into the pocket of my overalls. I pulled out the small plastic bag containing the fake pills. I had prepared it for this exact moment. "You dropped this," I said loudly for the benefit of any watching cameras, though I knew I had disabled the audio feed earlier. I pressed the bag into her hand, folding her fingers over it. "Put this in your apron," I whispered urgently. "Do not let them see. When he gives you the bottle tonight, swap them. Take these instead. Do you understand?" Nia looked at the bag, then at me. Confusion warred with instinct. "Why?" she asked. "Because you need to wake up," I said intensely. "You need to see the wolves in your house. Trust me. Please." She looked into my eyes. She saw the desperation. She saw the truth. For the first time in 15 years, my daughter made a choice of her own. She nodded. She slipped the bag into the pocket of her apron. "Who are you?" she asked again, her voice barely a breath. I picked up my shears and turned back to the hedge. "I am the one who is going to clean up this mess," I said. "Now go, before he sees us." Nia picked up her laundry basket. She looked at me one last time, a look of dawning hope mixed with fear. Then she turned and walked back toward the house. She walked a little straighter. She walked with a purpose she didn't have 10 minutes ago. I watched her go. The sun was dipping below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of blood and gold. The gala was tomorrow. The trap was set. The drugs were gone. Tomorrow Nia would wake up. And when she did, she would not be the victim anymore. She would be the daughter of Desmond Carter. And God help anyone who stood in her way. 2 days without the poison. That is all it took for the chemical fog to lift from my daughter's mind. I watched her from the edge of the rose garden I had decimated the day before. The sun was barely up, casting long gray shadows across the estate. Nia walked out of the laundry room door. She did not shuffle. She did not stare at her feet. She stood upright, inhaling the morning air as if tasting it for the first time in a decade. She looked at her hands. I saw her lift them to her face, turning them over and over. She traced the scars, the calluses, the burns from the soup incident. She was seeing the physical evidence of her slavery. But this time her mind was connecting the dots. She looked at the driveway where she had scrubbed oil on her knees. She looked at the rusted gate where Blake had screamed at her. I saw her lips move. She was whispering to herself. She was remembering. The memories were flooding back, no longer suppressed by the sedatives Blake had force-fed her. She remembered the day the mining company supposedly called. She remembered that there was no body. She remembered the funeral with an empty casket. And then the realization hit her like a physical blow. I saw her grab the porch railing to steady herself. She remembered the papers. She remembered signing trust documents while Blake held her hand and told her she was confused. She remembered him guiding the pen. She remembered him telling her that her signature was just a formality to pay off my debts. But I had no debts. I had left her millions. The math did not add up, and for the first time Nia could do the math. She turned and looked at the house. It was no longer a sanctuary or a prison she deserved. It was a crime scene, and she was the victim. Her eyes narrowed. The fear was gone, replaced by a cold, hard dawn of understanding. She walked back inside, but she did not go to the kitchen to start breakfast. She walked past the mop bucket. She walked past the pile of dirty linens Blake had left for her. She headed straight for the stairs. I dropped my rake and moved closer to the house. I had to see this. I had to be there if he touched her. I climbed the trellis on the west side, a skill I learned keeping equipment running in the jungle. I perched on the balcony outside the master bedroom. The heavy velvet curtains were drawn, but there was a gap. I pressed my eye to the glass. The master bedroom was a shrine to excess. Silk sheets, gold-leafed furniture, discarded designer clothes covering the floor. Crystal was sitting at the vanity table. She was wearing a silk robe that I recognized. It belonged to my wife. It was the robe Beatrice wore on our anniversary. Seeing that woman in it made bile rise in my throat. Nia pushed the door open. She did not knock. She stepped into the room, her spine stiff. Crystal spun around on the stool, dropping a lipstick. "What are you doing here?" Crystal shrieked. "This is a restricted area. Get out before I call Blake." Nia did not move. Her eyes were fixed on Crystal's neck. Around her throat, glowing softly in the vanity lights, was a triple-strand pearl necklace with a diamond clasp. "Take it off," Nia said. Her voice was raspy, but it was steady. It was the voice of a carter. Crystal laughed, a nervous tittering sound. "Excuse me, you do not give orders here, you little charity case. Get out and make my coffee." "That belongs to my mother," Nia said, taking a step forward. "My father gave that to her in Paris. It is not yours. Take it off." Crystal sneered and touched the pearls possessively. "Finders keepers honey. Blake gave this to me. He said it was too nice for a dead woman and too expensive for a maid. It is mine now. Everything here is mine." Nia lunged. It was an explosion of 15 years of repressed rage. She didn't strike Crystal. She reached for the necklace. Her fingers hooked around the strands. Crystal screamed and clawed at Nia's face, her manicured nails leaving angry red welts on Nia's cheek. "Let go!" Crystal yelled, flailing. "I will not!" Nia shouted back. "You are a thief. You are all thieves." The struggle was brief but violent. Nia yanked hard. The strand broke. Pearls scattered across the hardwood floor like hail, bouncing and rolling under the furniture. Crystal gasped, clutching her neck where the string had burned her. "You crazy witch!" Crystal screamed. She raised her hand and slapped Nia across the face with all her strength. The sound echoed through the room. Nia stumbled back, holding her cheek, but she did not cower. She stood her ground. Suddenly the bathroom door flew open. Blake stormed out, a towel wrapped around his waist, water dripping from his hair. He saw Crystal crying fake tears. He saw the pearls on the floor. He saw Nia standing there defiant. He did not ask what happened. He did not ask if Nia was hurt. He made his choice instantly. He grabbed Nia by her hair, twisting his fist into the thick strands until she cried out in pain. "I told you to stay in the basement!" Blake roared, dragging her backward. "You destroyed my property. You attacked my fiancé. I am not your property," Nia screamed, clawing at his hand. "I know what you did. I know my father left me money. I know you stole it." Blake froze for a second. The accusation hit its mark. But then his eyes went dark. He dragged her toward the door, throwing her weight around as if she were a rag doll. "You are insane," he hissed into her ear. "You are having an episode. This proves it. You are dangerous. Tonight, after the party, you are going away forever." He threw her into the hallway. She crashed against the wall and slid to the floor. Blake stood over her, his chest heaving. "Get out of my sight," he spat. "If I see you before the guests arrive, I will lock you in the coal chute." He slammed the bedroom door. I heard the lock click. I heard Crystal sobbing inside, complaining about her broken necklace. Outside in the hall, Nia slowly pulled herself up. She didn't cry. She wiped the blood from the scratch on her face. She looked at the closed door with a hatred so pure it could burn the house down. Then she turned and limped away toward the servants' quarters. I was shaking. I was vibrating with a violence I had not felt since the war in Sierra Leone. I had watched my daughter be assaulted. I had watched a man put his hands on her. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to kick in the glass doors, storm into that bedroom, and beat Blake Sterling until he could never use his hands again. I reached for the handle of the balcony door. I was going to kill him. I didn't care about the plan. I didn't care about the money. I was going to end him right now. My phone vibrated against my chest. It buzzed once, twice, 3 times. It was the emergency signal. I stopped. My hand hovered over the handle. I pulled the phone out. It was Steinberg. "Do not do it," Desmond, the text read. "I know you are watching. I know you want blood. But if you touch him now, he wins. He will sue. He will claim self-defense against a trespassing vagrant. He will use the assault to invalidate the debt transfer. He will walk away with the house, and your daughter will be left with nothing but a violent father in jail." I stared at the screen. Steinberg was right. Steinberg was always right. That was why I paid him millions. Violence was easy. Justice was hard. If I attacked him now, I was just an angry old man. If I waited 4 hours, I was God. I took a deep breath, forcing the red haze from my vision. I typed a reply. 4 hours. Not a minute more. I put the phone away. I needed to get to Nia. I needed to give her armor for the battle to come. I climbed down the trellis, dropping silently into the bushes. I circled the house to the small window that led to the laundry room where Nia slept. It was open a crack for ventilation. I could see her sitting on her cot, staring at the wall. She looked small, but she didn't look broken anymore. She looked like a soldier waiting for dawn. I took a piece of paper and a pen from my pocket. I wrote 4 words. Wear the blue dress. I folded the paper. I knew she still had the dress. I had bought it for her 18th birthday the week before I left. It was silk, the color of the midnight sky. Blake would have thrown it out, but Nia had hidden it. It was the only thing she had left of me. I slipped the note through the crack in the window. It fluttered down and landed on her pillow. Nia turned at the sound. She saw the paper. She picked it up and unfolded it. She read the words. Her hand went to her mouth. She looked at the window. I stayed in the shadows, letting her see only the brim of my hat. She nodded once. It was a pact. I slipped away into the garden. The catering trucks were arriving. The musicians were setting up. The stage was being built for Blake's grand announcement. He thought he was throwing a party to celebrate his success. He didn't know he was setting the stage for his own funeral. I went to the tool shed and sat on a bucket of fertilizer. I sharpened my shears. Swish, swish, swish. The sound was rhythmic and soothing. 4 hours. I visualized the timeline. At 7 p.m. the guests would arrive. At 8 p.m. Blake would make his toast. At 8:05 p.m. I would end his life as he knew it. I checked the time. 3:59. I closed my eyes and waited. The sun began to set, casting blood-red streaks across the sky. It was a good omen. Tonight the vampires who had drained my family would be dragged into the light, and they would burn. At 7 p.m. sharp, the iron gates swung open, not for me this time, but for a parade of Bentleys and Rolls-Royces that slithered up the driveway like shiny beetles. The house, which looked like a mausoleum by day, had been transformed into a beacon of artificial light. Spotlights cut through the darkness, illuminating the peeling paint just enough to make it look rustic rather than ruinous. Inside, the orchestra began to play a waltz that floated out into the garden, masking the rot that lay beneath the floorboards. I watched from the shadows of the hedges I had trimmed. Blake stood at the top of the stairs, greeting his guests. He looked every inch the lord of the manor in a midnight blue tuxedo that cost more than my father made in a lifetime. Beside him, Crystal shimmered in a silver gown that clung to her body like a second skin. She laughed at jokes she did not understand and accepted compliments on a home she had destroyed. She played the part of the devoted fiancée perfectly, her hand resting possessively on Blake's arm, her eyes scanning the crowd for approval. The guests were a collection of vultures in silk and diamonds. I recognized some of them from the financial pages. Speculators, hedge fund managers, men who made their fortunes stripping companies for parts. They did not come here for the friendship. They came for the blood in the water. I moved closer, blending into the service staff loading trays in the side tent. I heard their conversations drifting over the clinking of champagne flutes. I heard he is letting the place go for $5 million, one man whispered, swirling his drink. A steal for this location. He says he needs liquidity for a tech startup in Silicon Valley. Tech startup? Another laughed. I heard he is underwater on bad loans. But who cares? If the title is clean, I will buy it tonight. Blake was selling my legacy for scrap to cover his gambling debts. He was smiling, shaking hands, accepting congratulations on his business acumen while he stood on a trap door. He raised a glass to the crowd, his voice booming with false confidence. "Welcome, friends," he shouted. "Tonight is a celebration of new beginnings. We are saying goodbye to the old Carter estate and hello to the future." The crowd cheered, unaware that the future Blake spoke of involved a prison cell. I adjusted the brim of my dirty hat. I checked the heavy tray I had prepared. It was time to join the party. Deep beneath the polished floors of the ballroom, Nia sat in the darkness of the wine cellar. Blake had dragged her down there an hour before the first guest arrived. He had thrown her into the damp, cold room and locked the heavy oak door from the outside. "You stay here until the ink is dry," he had spat. "If I hear one sound, I will bury you in the garden." But Blake had made a mistake. He thought he had locked away a broken girl. He did not know she had the blood of a survivor in her veins, and he did not know that I had been there first. Nia fumbled in the dark, her hands brushing against the rough stone walls. She moved toward the old rack in the corner where we used to keep the vintage Bordeaux. Behind the last row of dusty bottles, she felt it. A garment bag taped to the back of the shelf. I had hidden it there 5 years ago during a brief visit back to the States that Blake never knew about, intending to give it to her before I was forced to leave again for security. Nia pulled it down. She unzipped the bag. Even in the gloom, the fabric seemed to glow. It was the blue silk dress, the color of the midnight sky over the Atlantic. She stripped off her maid's uniform, letting it fall to the dirty floor like a shed skin. She stepped into the silk. It was cool against her skin, a reminder of a time when she was loved, when she was cherished. She pulled the zipper up. It fit perfectly. She smoothed the skirt, her hands trembling not with fear, but with adrenaline. She reached into the pocket of the dress. Her fingers closed around cold steel, a pair of heavy-duty lineman's pliers. I had slipped them into the garment bag along with a note that simply said, "Freedom is a choice." Nia looked at the heavy iron hinges of the door. They were old, rusted by the dampness of the cellar. Blake had locked the deadbolt, but he had forgotten that the hinges were on the inside, a design flaw I had meant to fix 15 years ago. Now it was her salvation. She gripped the pliers. She clamped them onto the top pin of the hinge. She twisted. The rust groaned. She gritted her teeth, putting her back into it. The pin screeched and popped up an inch. She worked it again, sweating in the cool air until it clattered to the floor. She moved to the bottom hinge. Upstairs, the music swelled, masking the metallic sounds of her escape. Nia worked with a ferocity that would have terrified Blake. She was not just removing a door. She was dismantling his control. The second pin gave way. The heavy door sagged inward, held only by the lock. Nia put her shoulder against the wood and pushed. It groaned and swung open on the lock side, creating a gap just wide enough for her to slip through. She stepped out into the service hallway. She was covered in dust, her hair wild, but in that blue dress she looked like a queen returning from exile. She picked up a heavy iron candelabra from a hallway table. She was ready. I walked up the marble steps of the front entrance. I did not try to hide. I wore my mud-stained overalls, my boots leaving tracks of dirt on the pristine white runner carpet. I held a silver serving tray high on my shoulder, but there were no hors d'oeuvres on it. There was only a thick black binder. The chatter in the main hall died down, slowly spreading like a wave of silence as people noticed me. Women in ball gowns stepped back, wrinkling their noses. Men frowned, confused by this intrusion of poverty into their fantasy of wealth. I walked straight through the crowd, parting them like the Red Sea. I did not look left or right. My eyes were fixed on the stage at the far end of the room where Blake was holding court. He was in the middle of a joke, laughing at his own wit when he saw me. His laughter died in his throat. His face went slack with shock, then flushed with a violent purple rage. He saw the gardener he had humiliated. He saw the old man he had thrown $5 at. He did not see the danger. "What is this?" Blake shouted, his voice cracking. "Who let this filth in here?" He pointed a manicured finger at me. "You. I fired you this afternoon. Get out." I did not stop. I kept walking. My heavy boots thudding a rhythmic beat on the floor. I reached the bottom of the stage stairs. I lowered the tray. I picked up the black binder. It was heavy with the weight of his crimes. Security, Blake screamed, his voice rising to a shriek. "Where is security? Get this beggar out of my house! Drag him out!" Crystal stood beside him, clutching her pearls, looking around wildly. But no one moved. The security guards I had hired, the men who stood at the perimeter with earpieces and stone faces, did not flinch. They crossed their arms over their chests and watched. They did not work for Blake Sterling. They worked for the man who signed the checks, and that man was standing in overalls at the foot of the stage. I looked up at Blake. The room was silent now, deadly silent. Every eye was on us. "I am not the beggar, Blake," I said, my voice projecting to the back of the room without a microphone. "And this is not your house." I threw the binder onto the stage. It landed with a loud slap at his feet, sliding across the polished wood until it hit the toe of his expensive shoe. "It is time to pay the bill," I said. Blake looked at the binder, then at me, then at the silent security guards. For the first time, the arrogance cracked. Fear, real, primal fear, began to seep into his eyes. He realized too late that he wasn't the master of the gala, he was the entertainment, and the show was just beginning. The echo of Blake's scream for security hung in the air like the desperate cry of a dying animal. He pointed a trembling finger at me, expecting his rented uniformed guards to rush the stage and drag the dirty gardener away. He expected order. He expected obedience. He expected the world to bend to his will because he was wearing a tuxedo and standing on a platform. But the heavy double doors at the back of the ballroom did not open for the rental guards. They swung open with a violent thud that shook the crystal glasses on the tables. 10 men walked in. They did not wear the cheap polyester uniforms of the event security firm Blake had hired for minimum wage. They wore bespoke black suits that strained against muscle. They wore earpieces. They moved with the silent, synchronized lethality of a wolf pack entering a sheep pen. The crowd gasped and shrank back. These men were not here to check invitations. They were here for war. They marched down the center aisle, their eyes scanning the room for threats. Blake smiled a wide, manic grin of relief. He thought they were the police. He thought his influence had summoned a SWAT team to remove the intruder. "Thank God," Blake shouted, his voice cracking with hysteria. "Officers, arrest this man. He is trespassing. He is dangerous. Get him out of my sight." The men did not look at Blake. They did not acknowledge his existence. They reached the stage and split into two columns. They ascended the stairs, their footsteps heavy and precise. They walked past Blake, who stood with his mouth open, his hand still pointing at me. They walked straight to me. And then they turned around. They formed a semicircle facing outward, placing their bodies between me and the crowd, between me and Blake. They crossed their hands in front of them and stood at parade rest. They were not here to arrest the gardener. They were here to protect the king. A ripple of confusion went through the room. The guests whispered nervously, clutching their pearls and champagne flutes. Crystal took a step back, her face draining of color. She understood power dynamics better than Blake did. She knew that bodyguards do not protect the threat. They protect the asset. I reached into the pocket of my filthy overalls. Blake flinched, expecting a weapon. I pulled out a silk handkerchief. It was white pristine and embroidered with my initials. D.C. I unfolded it slowly, deliberately. I poured a little water from the pitcher on the speaker's podium onto the cloth. I scrubbed the engine grease from my cheeks. I wiped the dirt from my forehead. I took off the sweat-stained hat and dropped it on the floor next to the binder. I ran a hand through my gray hair, smoothing it back. I straightened my spine, letting the slump of the defeated laborer fall away. I stood to my full height of 6'3". The transformation was not magic. It was simply the truth revealing itself. The eyes that looked out at the crowd were not the eyes of a man who dug holes for a living. They were the eyes of a man who commanded thousands. I looked at the head of the security detail, a massive man named Marcus, who had been my chief of security in Sierra Leone. "Status?" I asked, my voice low and authoritative. "Perimeter secured," Sir Marcus replied, his voice crisp. "Local law enforcement is holding at the gate per your instructions. No one leaves until you give the order." Blake stared at us, his brain struggling to process the scene. He looked at Marcus, then at me, then at the grease-stained rag in my hand. "What is happening?" he whispered. "Who are you?" I tossed the dirty handkerchief at his feet. It landed softly next to his polished shoes. "I told you, Blake," I said. "I am the man who pays the bills." Before Blake could respond, a sound cut through the tension. It was the sound of heavy doors crashing open again, but this time it came from the service entrance near the kitchen. The guests turned their heads. A collective gasp rose from the floor. Nia stood in the doorway. She was covered in dust from the wine cellar. Her hair was wild, framing her face like a halo. She held a heavy iron candelabra in one hand like a club. But it was the dress that silenced the room. The blue silk shimmered under the ballroom lights. It was a dress from another time, a dress from a life before the darkness. It was wrinkled and slightly too big for her gaunt frame, but on her it looked like royal raiment. She scanned the room, her eyes wild and searching. She did not look at the guests. She did not look at the luxury or the food. She was looking for one thing. Her eyes swept over the stage. She saw Blake and her lip curled in a snarl. Then her gaze shifted. She saw the wall of black suits, and then she saw me standing in the center. She froze. The candelabra slipped from her fingers and clattered to the floor, the metallic ring echoing in the silence. She took a step forward. Her hands came up to her mouth. She squinted her good eye, focusing on my face, trying to reconcile the memory of her father with the man in the overalls. The drugs were gone. The lies were gone. She saw the scar on my chin from a mining accident when she was 3. She saw the way I held my hands. She saw the love that burned in my eyes brighter than any spotlight. "Dad," she whispered. It was a sound so broken and so hopeful it broke my heart. She took another step and then she screamed it, a primal cry of recognition and relief that tore through the polite atmosphere of the gala like a shrapnel bomb. "Dad!" She started to run. She ran past the shocked guests, bumping into waiters, knocking over chairs. She ran with a limp, her body weak from years of abuse, but her spirit flying. Blake watched her run. He looked from her to me, and the reality of his situation finally crashed down on him. The ghost was real. The dead man was standing on his stage. The fortune he had stolen belonged to a living, breathing man who had just brought an army into his living room. Panic snapped his mind. He let out a high-pitched laugh, a sound of pure madness. "No!" he shrieked, grabbing the microphone stand. "No! She is crazy. Don't listen to her. She is having an episode." He pointed at me, his eyes bulging. "That is not her father. Her father is dead. I have him in a jar. I have him in a box in the storage unit. He is ash. He is dust. This man is an imposter. He is a paid actor." He looked at the crowd, pleading for them to believe his delusion. "She is sick. I told you all, she is sick. She thinks the gardener is her daddy. Look at him. He is filth. Her father was a great man. He died a hero. I have the certificate. I have the paper." Naya ignored him. She reached the stairs of the stage. She scrambled up them on her hands and knees, desperate to reach me. Marcus stepped aside, opening the protective circle. I fell to my knees. I didn't care about the dignity. I didn't care about the audience. I opened my arms. Nia collided with me. She buried her face in my dirty chest, sobbing so hard her whole body shook. I wrapped my arms around her, shielding her from the world, holding her as tightly as I had when she was a baby. I smelled the dust of the cellar and the cheap soap Blake forced her to use, but underneath it all, she smelled like my daughter. "I am here, baby girl," I whispered into her hair, tears streaming down my grease-streaked face. "I am here. I am real. I never left you. I am so sorry. Daddy." She choked out, clutching my overalls. "You came back. You came back." Blake watched us. The sight of our reunion, the undeniable truth of our connection, shattered his last defense. He realized he could not lie his way out of this. He could not charm the crowd. He was exposed. And like a cornered rat, he attacked. "Get away from her," he roared, lunging across the stage. "She is mine. She is my wife. She belongs to me." He reached for Nia, his hands curled into claws. He wanted to drag her away. He wanted to hurt her one last time to prove he still owned her. He never touched her. He didn't even get close. Marcus moved. It was a blur of motion too fast for the eye to follow. One moment he was standing at parade rest, the next he was between Blake and us. He didn't use a weapon. He didn't shout. He simply stepped into Blake's path and caught Blake's outstretched arm in midair. Blake's momentum carried him forward, but his arm stopped dead in Marcus's grip. There was a sickening, wet crunch as the bone in Blake's forearm snapped under the pressure. The sound was louder than a gunshot. It echoed off the vaulted ceiling. The orchestra stopped playing. The guests stopped breathing. Blake's scream was delayed by a second of pure shock. Then he fell to his knees, howling, clutching his broken limb. He writhed on the floor, his tuxedo staining with the dust from my boots. Marcus stood over him, his face impassive. He didn't even look winded. He adjusted his cufflink. "Threat neutralized," Sir Marcus said calmly. I stood up, lifting Nia with me. I kept one arm around her shoulders, supporting her weight. I looked down at Blake Sterling curling on the floor of the stage, whining like a kicked dog. Crystal was screaming somewhere in the crowd, but her voice sounded distant and irrelevant. I looked out at the sea of faces, the bankers, the investors, the socialites, the people who had come to feast on the carcass of my estate. They stared back at me in terrified silence. They saw the broken man on the floor. They saw the weeping woman in the blue dress, and they saw me, the man in the overalls who commanded the violence. I walked to the microphone. I kicked the stand upright. I tapped it once. The sound boomed through the speakers. "Get out," I said. My voice was calm, cold, and final. "The party is over. The bar is closed, and the property is under new management." I looked down at Blake again. "Except you," I said. "You stay. It is time to settle the tab. And trust me, son-in-law, you cannot afford it." I signaled to the technician in the control booth at the back of the room. I had paid him $5,000 10 minutes ago to ignore Blake's playlist and follow my cue. The massive LED screen behind the stage, which had been displaying a slideshow of Blake's vanity portraits, flickered and went black. A high-pitched screech of static tore through the speakers, making the guests cover their ears. Then the video began. The image was grainy at first, taken from the micro camera I had hidden in the chandelier. But the audio was crystal clear. It played at maximum volume, booming off the vaulted ceilings. It was the kitchen scene from yesterday. The guests watched in stunned silence as Crystal poured boiling soup over Nia's hand. The sound of Nia's pained whimper echoed through the ballroom, magnified 1,000 times. A collective gasp went through the crowd. A woman in the front row wearing a diamond choker covered her mouth with a gloved hand. But the video did not stop there. It cut to the bedroom scene. It showed Blake storming out of the bathroom. It showed him grabbing Nia by her hair. The violence was raw and unfiltered. On the giant screen, Blake's face was 10 feet tall, twisted into a mask of pure hatred as he dragged my daughter across the floor. "You are insane," the on-screen Blake hissed, his voice distorting slightly through the speakers. "Tonight after the party, you are going away forever." The real Blake lay on the stage floor, clutching his broken arm, his face pale as he watched his own monstrosity broadcast to the people he tried to impress. He tried to speak, to shout over the recording, but the sound of his own voice threatening my daughter drowned him out. The video cut again. This time, it was a recording from the pantry. Blake and Crystal planning the sale of the house, planning the commitment of Nia to a state asylum, laughing about how easy it was to drug her. "She will sign whatever I put in front of her," the Blake on the screen said. "She will think she is signing a birthday card." The reaction in the room was visceral. These were people who valued money above all else, but even they had lines. Watching a man plot to institutionalize his wife to steal her inheritance was too much. A banker near the stage turned pale and vomited onto the polished floor. Others turned away, unable to watch the cruelty. The veneer of sophistication was gone. The smell of expensive perfume was replaced by the stench of moral rot. I pointed at the screen, my finger like a judgment from above. "Look," I roared, my voice shaking the walls. "Look at the man you came to toast. Look at the woman you admire. That is not a husband. That is a parasite. That is a monster who drugged my child and beat her while he wore my suits and drank my wine." Crystal stood near the edge of the stage, frozen in the spotlight. On the screen, her digital doppelganger was laughing about Nia's pain. In reality, her face was a mask of terror. She saw the way the guests were looking at her. They were looking at her like she was a disease. The social status she had clawed for, the reputation she had built on lies, it was all incinerating in the glow of that screen. She did the only thing a coward knows how to do. She ran. Crystal hitched up her silver gown and scrambled off the stage. She didn't look at Blake. She didn't look at me. She kept her head down, trying to make herself small, trying to disappear into the mass of black tuxedos and evening gowns. She pushed a waiter aside, sending a tray of champagne flutes crashing to the floor. She elbowed a socialite in the ribs. She was heading for the side exit, the servant's door, thinking she could slip into the night and vanish with the jewelry she had stolen. She made it 10 feet. The side door swung open, but it wasn't to let her out. A man stepped in, blocking the exit with his body. He was short, balding, and wore a suit that cost more than the car Crystal drove. It was Steinberg, my lawyer. He didn't look like a bodyguard, but he had a presence that stopped her dead in her tracks. He adjusted his glasses and looked at her over the rim. "Ms. Vance Steinberg," said his voice calm and dry like rustling paper. "I would not go through that door if I were you." Crystal panted, looking for a way around him. "Move," she hissed. "You have no right to stop me. I am leaving." Steinberg held up a thin manila envelope. "Actually, I have every right," he said. "You are currently in possession of stolen property, specifically a pearl necklace valued at $200,000 reported missing from the Carter estate inventory. Furthermore, you are named as a co-conspirator in a federal fraud investigation regarding the falsification of medical documents." Crystal's eyes went wide. "How do you know that?" Steinberg smiled, a thin, shark-like smile. "We bought your debt, Ms. Vance," he said. "We own your credit cards. We own your car loan. And we have a team of auditors currently stripping your apartment in the city. If you walk out that door, you walk out as a fugitive with zero assets. If you stay, you are simply a witness." He stepped aside slightly, offering her a choice. "The police are at the front gate," Steinberg added. "They are very interested in your testimony regarding Mr. Sterling. I suggest you stay and clarify your position." Crystal looked at the open door, then back at Blake writhing on the stage. She realized she was alone. The money was gone. The escape was closed. She slumped, her shoulders defeated, and backed away from the door, trapping herself in the room with her crimes. I turned my attention back to the stage. Nia was still clinging to me, her face buried in my chest, but she was watching now. She needed to see this. She needed to see the monster reduced to nothing. I bent down and picked up the black binder I had thrown earlier. I opened it to a specific page marked with a red tab. I walked over to Blake, who was trying to crawl away, his broken arm cradled against his chest. I placed my heavy boot on the tail of his tuxedo jacket, pinning him to the floor. He looked up at me, tears of pain and humiliation streaming down his face. "You can't do this," he whimpered. "This is my house. I have rights. We are married. Half of this is mine." I laughed. It was a cold sound, devoid of humor. "You have nothing." "Blake," I said, "you never read the fine print, did you? You were so busy spending the money you never bothered to read the source." I held the binder up so the light hit the text. "This is the Carter Family Trust," I announced to the room, ensuring everyone heard. "It was established 15 years ago. It has a very specific clause. Clause 17B, the anti-abuse provision." I looked down at Blake, reading the words that would end his life. "It states clearly that the beneficiary's spouse acts as a trustee only so long as they act in the best interest of the heir. However, upon the presentation of irrefutable evidence of physical, psychological, or financial abuse, the trusteeship is immediately revoked. Furthermore, any assets purchased, mingled, or used by the trustee are subject to immediate forfeiture to the grantor." I snapped the binder shut. "I am the grantor, Blake," I said. "I am the source. And I just presented the evidence to the entire Eastern Seaboard." Blake shook his head, his eyes darting around the room, looking for an ally, looking for a lawyer, looking for anyone who would tell him this wasn't happening. "That is not legal," he stammered. "You can't just take it back." I leaned down, getting right in his face. "It is legal," I whispered. "Steinberg wrote it, and Steinberg never loses." I stood up and spread my arms, encompassing the ballroom, the chandelier, the guests, and the house itself. "This house is mine," I thundered. "The wine you are drinking is mine. The clothes on your back were paid for with my money. You are standing on my floor. You are breathing my air. And you put your hands on my daughter." I leaned in close, my voice dropping to a growl that only he could hear. "You are done, Blake. You are finished. You are not a millionaire. You are a squatter, and I am evicting you." Blake slumped onto the floor, the fight draining out of him along with his color. He looked at the ceiling, at the beautiful frescoes he had claimed were his, and he realized the truth. He was a tenant who had destroyed the landlord's property, and the rent was past due. Blake pushed himself up from the floor using his good arm. His tuxedo jacket was torn and covered in dust from my boots, but his arrogance was not completely broken yet. He looked at the silent crowd of bankers and investors and saw them not as witnesses to his shame, but as a jury he could manipulate. He scrambled to his feet, swaying slightly from the pain of his broken arm, but his voice rose in a desperate shriek of legal entitlement. "You cannot do this," he screamed, pointing a trembling finger at me. "I know the law. I know my rights. We have been married for 10 years. This is a community property state. Everything here is marital assets. The house is mine. The investments are mine. Even if you are the grantor, once the money entered the joint account, it became mine." He turned to the crowd, his eyes wild, pleading for validation. "Tell him," he shouted at a partner from a major law firm standing in the front row. "Tell this old fool how it works. I am the husband. I manage these assets. I grew this portfolio. I have sweat equity in this estate. You cannot just evict a spouse. It takes months. It takes court orders. I am not going anywhere." He looked back at me, a sneer forming on his bloodied lip. "You made a mistake, Desmond. You showed your hand too early. You assaulted me in front of witnesses. I will sue you for every dime you have left. I will take this house, and I will take your daughter's trust, and I will leave you rotting in a cell while I spend your money on lawyers." I stood motionless on the stage. I did not interrupt him. I let him build his castle of cards. I let him scream about rights and laws and community property. I let him believe that the legal system was a shield he could hide behind. I waited until he ran out of breath, until his chest was heaving and his face was slick with sweat. "Are you finished, Blake?" I asked calmly. "I am finished when I say I am finished," he spat. "Get off my stage." I looked at Steinberg, who was standing in the shadows of the wings holding a slim leather portfolio. I nodded once. Steinberg stepped into the light. He walked to the center of the stage, his footsteps quiet and precise. He did not look at the crowd. He looked only at Blake. He opened the portfolio and extracted a single document encased in a protective plastic sleeve. It was old. The paper was slightly yellowed, but the seal at the bottom was bright red wax stamped with the crest of a notary in Zurich. "You seem to have forgotten something," Mr. Sterling Steinberg said, his voice cutting through the room like a scalpel. Blake squinted at the document. Confusion clouded his eyes. "What is that?" he asked. Steinberg held it up so the light hit the red seal. "This is the original prenuptial agreement you signed 10 years ago," he said. "The one you signed 3 days before the wedding in a private room at the Plaza Hotel." Blake laughed. It was a nervous, high-pitched sound. "You are bluffing," he said. "That agreement is gone. I burned it. I burned the only copy the day after the wedding. I watched it turn to ash in the fireplace of the honeymoon suite. There is no record of it." I stepped forward then, standing shoulder to shoulder with my lawyer. "You burned your copy, Blake," I said. "You burned the copy I let you have." "Did you really think a man who builds mines in war zones relies on a single piece of paper?" Steinberg tapped the document. "This is the master copy," he explained. "It has been sitting in a climate-controlled vault in Switzerland for a decade waiting for this exact moment. And it has a very specific clause regarding infidelity." Steinberg began to read, and the words fell like stones on Blake's coffin. Clause 4, Section C. In the event that the party of the second part engages in extramarital relations, any claim to community property, spousal support, or marital assets is immediately and irrevocably forfeited. The marriage is considered void from inception regarding financial distribution. Steinberg lowered the paper and looked at Crystal, who was still cowering near the exit, blocked by security. "And since you just broadcast your mistress to the entire eastern seaboard via giant LED screen," Steinberg added, gesturing to the black screen behind us, "I would say the infidelity clause has been triggered. You do not get half, Blake. You do not get the house. You do not get a settlement. You leave this marriage exactly as you entered it, with nothing." Blake stared at the document. The color drained from his face, leaving him looking like a corpse in a tuxedo. The legal shield he thought he had was gone. The years of scheming, the years of waiting for me to die, the years of abusing my daughter, it was all for nothing. He had gambled on a bonfire 10 years ago, and he had lost. But the destruction was not over. The financial crush was just beginning. A sound cut through the silence. It was a digital chime, a text message notification. It came from Blake's pocket. Then another, and another. Ping, ping, ping. It sounded like a countdown. Blake reached into his pocket with his good hand. He pulled out his phone. The screen lit up, casting a ghostly blue glow on his face. He stared at it. His eyes widened. "What did you do?" he whispered, looking up at me. "I did what you taught me, Blake," I said. "I leveraged my assets." "Ping. That is your primary checking account," I explained. "Frozen. The bank flagged it for suspicious activity regarding the fraudulent medical payments you made yesterday." "Ping. That is your investment portfolio," I continued. "Liquidated. The margin call came in 5 minutes ago. Since the house is no longer collateral, the bank called the loan. You are insolvent." Ping, ping, ping. The notifications came faster now, a relentless drumbeat of ruin. "That is your credit cards," Steinberg added, checking his own tablet. "American Express, Visa, MasterCard, all canceled. Your credit score just dropped 300 points in 30 seconds. Blake tapped the screen frantically, trying to log into his banking app. His fingers slipped on the glass. He was hyperventilating. "My money," he gasped. "I had $2 million in the offshore account. I saw it this morning." I took a step closer. "You mean the money you stole from the trust?" I said. "We recovered that. The wire transfer was reversed based on the evidence of fraud. It is back in Nia's name where it belongs." Blake looked at Nia. She was standing behind me, watching him with eyes that were no longer afraid. She saw him for what he was, a man who was defined entirely by a number on a screen, and that number was now 0. A sudden flash of orange light swept across the ballroom windows, followed by the loud rhythmic beeping of a heavy vehicle reversing. The guests turned toward the French doors that looked out onto the driveway. Outside, a massive tow truck was backing up to the front entrance. The driver hopped out and hooked chains onto the axle of the red Ferrari Blake had arrived in, the car he had thrown a $5 bill at me from. Blake ran to the window, clutching his broken arm. No, he screamed, banging on the glass. Not the car. Anything but the car. He watched helplessly as the winch whined, and the front of his beloved sports car was hoisted into the air. It hung there like a trophy, a symbol of his ego dangling on a hook. That vehicle was purchased with embezzled funds, Steinberg announced to the room. It is now evidence. The tow truck driver waved a hand, got back in the cab, and drove off, dragging the Ferrari down the long driveway. The screech of tires on asphalt penetrated the glass, a final insult to Blake's pride. Blake slid down the glass door, collapsing onto the floor. He looked at his phone, which was still chiming with notifications of bounced checks and canceled memberships. He looked at the empty spot where his car used to be. He looked at the guests who were now looking at him with open disgust. He had no home. He had no money. He had no car. He had no wife. He was stripped bare in front of the very people he had tried so hard to impress. I walked over to him. I stood over him, my shadow falling across his face. "You asked me to buy a sandwich earlier," I said, my voice low and hard. I reached into the pocket of my overalls. I pulled out the crumpled $5 bill he had thrown at me that morning. I smoothed it out. I dropped it on his chest. "Keep it," I said. "You are going to need it for the bus, because you are not sleeping here tonight." The silence that followed the departure of the tow truck was heavy and suffocating. Blake Sterling sat on the polished floor, surrounded by the debris of his life. The $5 bill I had dropped on his chest lay there like a tombstone. He looked at it. He looked at the empty driveway. And then something in him broke. The arrogance, the cruelty, and the facade of the powerful master of the house evaporated, leaving behind only a pathetic, terrified man who realized he had absolutely nothing left. He scrambled to his knees. He ignored the pain in his broken arm. He ignored the guests who were looking at him with open revulsion. He crawled across the floor toward the only person who had ever shown him mercy. He crawled toward Nia. "Naya, baby, please," he sobbed, reaching out with his good hand to grasp the hem of her blue dress. "You cannot let him do this. You know me. You know I love you." He looked up at her, his face streaked with tears and snot, his expensive haircut disheveled. "It was not me, Nia," he pleaded, his voice rising to a hysterical pitch. "It was her. It was Crystal. She made me do it. She poisoned my mind. She told me to drug you. She told me to sell the house. I was weak, Nia. I was under her spell. But I love you. We are family. We have a history. Please tell your father to stop. Tell him to give it back." Crystal, who was trapped near the door by my security team, let out a screech of indignation. "You lying coward," she yelled. "You told me she was a burden. You told me you hated her. You promised me millions if I helped you get rid of her. Do not try to pin this on me." Blake ignored her. He clung to Nia's skirt, burying his face in the silk fabric, the same fabric he had likely walked past 100 times in the cellar without caring. "I will change Nia," he wept. "I will be better. I will work. I will earn it back. Just do not let them throw me out. I have nowhere to go. They will kill me on the street. You are the only one who ever cared about me. Please, baby. Please." It was a display of cowardice so profound it made my stomach turn. This man who had beaten her, who had starved her, who had planned to lock her in an asylum, was now begging for her protection. He was banking on the old Nia, the Nia he had broken, the Nia who would apologize for being burned with soup. He thought he could still manipulate the victim he had created, but he was wrong. That victim had died in the wine cellar. Nia looked down at him. She did not pull away. She did not kick him. She simply stood there immobile as a statue, watching him weep on her dress. Her expression was unreadable. It was not anger. It was not pity. It was the absolute cold clarity of someone looking at a stranger. She slowly reached down and peeled his fingers off her dress one by one. She did it with the same detachment one might use to remove a leech. Blake looked up at her, hope flickering in his eyes, thinking she was touching him with affection. "Nia." She stepped back, leaving him kneeling on the floor, clutching at empty air. She turned her back on him. She walked over to the main banquet table, which was still laden with the feast Blake had ordered. She walked past the caviar, past the lobster, past the crystal towers. She stopped in front of a silver ice bucket. Inside, resting in a bed of crushed ice, was a bottle of wine. It was a Domaine de la Romane Conti. I recognized the label immediately. It was a vintage worth $5,000. Blake had ordered it specially for the toast. He had planned to open it the moment the sale of the house was finalized. He had planned to drink the proceeds of my daughter's misery. Nia reached into the bucket. The ice rattled. She pulled the heavy bottle out, water dripping from the dark glass. She held it by the neck. It was heavy, a weapon of glass and status. The room went deadly quiet. The guests watched, mesmerized. They wondered if she was going to smash it over his head. I wondered it too. And if she had, I would have testified it was an accident. She turned back to Blake. She walked toward him slowly, the bottle dangling from her hand. Blake watched her approach, his eyes widening. He saw the bottle. He saw the vintage. He licked his lips instinctively, remembering the taste of the luxury he had lost. "Nia," he whispered uncertainly. "What are you doing?" Nia stopped a foot away from him. She looked at the bottle, then at him. "You wanted to celebrate Blake," she said. Her voice was soft, but it carried to every corner of the room. "You bought this with the money you stole from my father's trust. You bought this while I was eating leftovers in the kitchen. You told me I wasn't worth the water I drank." She looked at the label, reading it aloud. "Grand Cru," she read. $5,000. "That is more than you paid me for 5 years of labor. That is more than the surgery for my eye would have cost." She uncorked the bottle. The pop sounded like a small explosion in the silence. Blake tried to stand up, sensing something was wrong, but he slipped on the polished floor and fell back to his knees. "Nia, please," he stammered. "That is valuable. Do not waste it. We can return it. We can get the money back." Even now, at the edge of the abyss, he was thinking about the money. He could not help himself. It was his religion and his disease. Nia smiled. It was a terrifying smile, devoid of any warmth. "I am not wasting it," she said. "I am giving you what you wanted. You wanted the lifestyle, Blake. You wanted to be bathed in luxury." She tilted the bottle. A stream of dark red liquid poured out. It splashed onto Blake's head, soaking his hair, running down his forehead into his eyes. He sputtered and gasped, trying to shield his face with his good hand, but Nia moved with him. She poured methodically. She poured the wine over his white tuxedo shirt, staining it the color of a deep arterial wound. She poured it over his expensive jacket. She poured it until the bottle was empty and Blake was kneeling in a puddle of $5,000 wine, looking like he had been slaughtered. The smell of rich grapes and alcohol filled the air, cloying and overwhelming. Blake sat there, dripping, shivering, the red liquid tracking lines down his face like bloody tears. He looked up at her through the crimson mask, completely broken. "There," Nia said, dropping the empty bottle onto the floor beside him. It did not break. It rolled away with a hollow sound. "That is your salary," she said. "That is the payment for every floor I scrubbed, every meal I cooked, and every tear I cried." She wiped her hand on her dress, not caring about the stain. "It is your bathwater, Blake," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper that echoed like a judgment. "Now you look on the outside like you are on the inside. Filthy." She turned away from him. She did not look back at the man who had been her husband. She did not look back at the life she had lived. She walked toward me, her head held high, the blue dress flowing around her like water. She stopped in front of me. She looked into my eyes, and I saw the little girl I had left 15 years ago, but forged in fire. She was stronger than I had ever been. She had faced her demon, and she had drowned him. "Dad," she said. I put my hands on her shoulders, feeling the trembling she was trying to hide. "Yes, baby girl," I said. "I am tired," she said. "I am tired of the smell of this place. I am tired of the noise. I am tired of them." She gestured vaguely behind her at Blake sobbing in the wine puddle and Crystal cowering by the door. "I want them gone," she said. "I want them out of my house. I want them out of my life. I never want to see their faces again." I nodded. I looked over her shoulder at Marcus, who was waiting for my signal. "Consider it done," I said. I kissed her forehead. It was cool and tasted of salt and dust. "Go to the car, Nia," I said gently. "Steinberg is waiting. He will take you to the hotel. Order room service. Take a bath. Sleep in a bed with sheets that cost more than Blake's soul. I will handle the trash." Nia nodded. She walked out the front door, past the silent guests, past the security guards, past the wreckage of her marriage. She walked out into the night a free woman. I watched her go until the heavy doors closed behind her. Then I turned back to the room. I looked at Blake Sterling, a red stain on the floor of my home. Marcus. I said, my voice flat. Yes, sir. Remove him, I said. And Marcus, do not be gentle. Marcus was in the process of hauling Blake up by his collar when the heavy oak doors of the ballroom burst open for the second time that night. But this time it was not a family member seeking redemption. It was the law. Blue and red lights flashed through the windows, painting the walls in strokes of violence. The local police chief strode in, flanked by 4 uniformed officers. He looked like a man who had been interrupted from a peaceful dinner, and he was not happy. Blake saw the uniforms, and his face lit up with a delusional hope that was painful to witness. He twisted in Marcus's grip, ignoring the agony in his broken arm, and screamed toward the officers. "Officer, over here. Help me. This man is insane. He broke into my house. He assaulted me. He has a private militia holding us hostage. Shoot him. Shoot them all." He was panting, spitting blood, and wine, convinced that the badge represented his salvation. He thought that because he was white and rich and I was black, and dressed in overalls, the police were naturally his servants. He forgot that in this town, power does not come from skin color. It comes from who owns the debt on the police station. And I owned the municipal bonds. The chief did not draw his weapon. He did not yell at my security team to stand down. He walked calmly through the sea of terrified guests, stepping over the puddle of wine where Blake had been kneeling. He stopped at the foot of the stage and looked up at me. He tipped his cap. "Good evening, Mr. Carter," the chief said. "We received a disturbance call, and then we received a call from your lawyer regarding a grand larceny in progress." Blake went slack in Marcus's grip. He looked from the chief to me, his brain misfiring. "You know him," Blake whispered. "You know the gardener." The chief looked at Blake with profound pity. "That is not the gardener's son," the chief said. "That is Desmond Carter. He built this town's infrastructure. He donated the wing of the hospital where they are going to set your arm. And according to the deed filed at the county clerk's office 30 minutes ago, he is the sole owner of this property, which makes you the intruder." Blake shook his head, tears streaming down his face again. No, he is dead. I have the certificate." The chief ignored him. He turned to his officers. "Secure the perimeter. No one leaves until Mr. Carter says they leave." Blake slumped. The last pillar of his reality had collapsed. The law was not here to save him. The law was here to process him. I walked down the steps of the stage. The crowd parted for me again, but this time there was no confusion in their eyes. There was only fear. They looked at me like I was a king who had returned from the grave to judge the wicked. I walked past Blake. I walked toward the side door where Crystal was still trying to make herself invisible behind a potted palm tree. She saw me coming and shrank back, pressing herself against the wall. She clutched her left wrist with her right hand, trying to cover something. Steinberg had stopped her earlier, but he had not searched her. He knew I wanted that pleasure. I stopped in front of her. She was trembling so hard her silver dress shimmered like water. "Mr. Carter?" she squeaked. "I didn't know. I swear. I just did what he told me. I am a victim here." I did not speak. I reached out and took her left wrist. She tried to pull away, but my grip was iron. I pulled her hand away, revealing the jewelry she was trying to hide. It was not the pearl necklace Nia had broken earlier. It was a bracelet. 5 strands of rare black pearls interwoven with platinum and encrusted with raw, uncut diamonds. It was a piece commissioned by my grandfather. It was unique, and it had been missing for 5 years. I held her wrist up so the light caught the diamonds. "Do you know what this is, Crystal?" I asked, my voice carrying through the silent room. She shook her head rapidly. "It is just costume jewelry. Blake gave it to me. It is fake." I looked at the chief. "Chief O'Malley," I said. 5 years ago, there was a break-in at the Carter Private Museum in the city. Several items were taken, including the Midnight Star bracelet. We filed a federal report. We alerted the FBI. The insurance company paid out $200,000 on the claim." I looked back at Crystal. "This is that bracelet. Which means you are not just wearing stolen property. You are in possession of evidence in an active federal investigation involving insurance fraud and interstate transport of stolen goods." Crystal's knees buckled. She knew what that meant. It meant federal prison. It meant no bail. "I did not steal it," she screamed, her voice shrill and piercing. "I didn't. I wasn't even in the state 5 years ago." "Then how did it get on your wrist?" I asked, tightening my grip. She looked at Blake. She looked at the man she had conspired with, the man she had slept with, the man she had planned to kill me with. And she made a calculation. She realized that the ship was sinking and there was only one life raft. "He gave it to me," she shrieked, pointing a shaking finger at Blake. He told me he took it from your safe deposit box years ago. He said he staged the robbery to get the insurance money to pay off a bookie in Vegas. He has a whole bag of them in the trunk of his car. The room erupted in gasps. Blake's head snapped up. The accusation was the final straw. He had lost his money, his house, and his status. He was not going to go to prison alone. He was not going to let the woman he bought with stolen money send him up the river. You lying witch, Blake roared, struggling against Marcus. You begged for that bracelet. You told me you wouldn't sleep with me unless I gave you the real diamonds. He looked at the police, desperate to shift the narrative. She is the mastermind officer. She is the one who knows the fences. She has been selling the loose stones in the city for months. She is laundering the money through that fake charity she runs. Crystal's eyes went wide. She lunged at him across the room, her fingernails aimed at his eyes. You rat, she screamed. You told me the charity was safe. You said the restaurant was the wash. She turned to the chief, babbling frantically. Check the books for the Sterling Bistro. Check the inventory. He is buying truffles and caviar that never arrive. He is funneling cash from the illegal poker games through the catering budget. He is evading taxes. He hasn't paid the IRS in 5 years. Blake screamed back over her, trying to drown out her confession with his own. She is the one who forged the medical signatures. She knew the forger from her days as an escort. She introduced me to Paul Hayes. She set up the meeting. I stood in the center of the chaos, watching them tear each other apart. It was a symphony of self-preservation. They were vomiting their secrets, screaming their felonies, confessing to crimes I didn't even know they had committed. Money laundering, tax evasion, insurance fraud, forgery, conspiracy to commit murder. The chief motioned to his officers. They moved in, pulling handcuffs from their belts. Okay, that is enough, the chief shouted over the din. You are both under arrest. You have the right to remain silent, although I highly suggest you start using it because you are digging a hole to China. They cuffed Blake first. He winced as they pulled his arms back, careful of the break, but showing no sympathy. Then they cuffed Crystal. She was sobbing now, mascara running down her face, ruining the silver gown. As they dragged them toward the door, passing the guests they had tried to impress, Blake locked eyes with me. Why, he croaked. Why didn't you just fire me? Why did you have to destroy me? I looked at him. I looked at the ruin of a man who had hurt my daughter. Because you broke the one rule, Blake, I said. You touched the family. And when you touch the family, you don't get fired. You get erased. The officers hauled them out. The flashing lights swirled against the ballroom walls one last time before the sirens faded into the distance. The room was quiet again, save for the nervous shuffling of the guests. I looked at Steinberg. He was smiling, that thin, shark-like smile. Did you get all that? He asked. Every word I said. The audio recording on my phone had been running the entire time. Their mutual confessions in front of a police chief and 100 witnesses were admissible. They had sealed their own fate. I turned to the crowd. They were waiting to see what the monster in the overalls would do next. Leave, I said simply. They didn't need to be told twice. They fled. They abandoned their half-eaten lobster and their full glasses of wine. They scurried out the front door like roaches when the lights turned on, desperate to distance themselves from the blast radius of Blake Sterling. In 10 minutes, the house was empty. The staff had vanished. The music was gone. It was just me, Steinberg, Marcus, and the silence of a house that had seen too much. I walked over to the window. I looked out at the driveway. The police cars were gone. The guests were gone. My daughter was safe in a hotel. I looked down at my hands. They were still dirty. They were still rough, but they were the hands that had cleaned the rot out of my home. I turned to Marcus. Lock the gates, I said. Yes, sir. And Marcus, I added, looking at the spilled wine on the floor. Burn the rug. I don't want anything they touched left in this house. I walked toward the stairs. I was tired. I was older than I had been yesterday. But as I climbed the steps toward the master bedroom, toward the balcony, where I had watched my daughter fight back, I felt lighter. The ghost was gone. Desmond Carter was back, and he had work to do. The transition from the velvet world of the Hamptons to the concrete reality of the county lockup is a shock to the system that few men like Blake Sterling ever experience. He did not go quietly. The police cruiser smelled of stale sweat and industrial disinfectant, a sharp contrast to the leather interior of the Ferrari he had watched being towed away just an hour before. When they arrived at the precinct, he was dragged out, his tuxedo shirt stained with the $5,000 wine my daughter had poured over him. It had dried into a sticky crust that looked remarkably like old blood. They processed him with the efficiency of a machine that does not care about your net worth. They took his fingerprints, pressing his manicured hands onto the ink pad. They took his mugshot, his face a mask of confusion and rage, his hair matted to his forehead. They took his shoelaces, his belt, and the expensive cufflinks that held his torn sleeves together. He was stripped of every symbol of his status until he was just another number in the system. When the heavy steel door of the holding cell slammed shut behind him, the sound echoed with a finality that should have broken him. But Blake was still operating on the delusion of his own importance. He stood in the center of the cramped cell, ignoring the open toilet in the corner and the graffiti scratched into the cinder block walls. He gripped the bars with his good hand, his broken arm throbbing in the sling the paramedics had hastily applied. "I am a millionaire," he screamed into the echoing corridor. "Do you hear me? I am Blake Sterling. I own half of the Carter estate. This is a mistake. A massive lawsuit waiting to happen. I demand my phone call. I demand my lawyer. Get the warden down here. I play golf with the mayor." He paced the small space, his expensive shoes clicking on the cold concrete. He did not sit on the metal bench. He did not look at the other man sitting in the shadows of the top bunk. He was too busy shouting at the empty hallway. "You cannot keep me in here," he yelled, his voice cracking. "I have rights. I have assets. My wife will be here any minute with the bail money. You are all going to lose your badges. Do you know who I am?" He truly believed it. He believed that money was a force field that could repel consequences. He believed that the rules of gravity did not apply to him. He screamed until his throat was raw, until the other prisoners down the block started yelling back, telling him to shut up. He screamed for justice, not realizing he was already receiving it. Hours passed. The adrenaline began to fade, replaced by the cold, damp chill of the jail. Blake finally slumped onto the metal bench, shivering in his ruined tuxedo. He waited for the high-priced lawyer he kept on retainer. He waited for the shark who would walk in with a briefcase full of loopholes and get him out. But the shark never came. Instead, the door buzzed and clanked open. A man walked in. He was not wearing a bespoke suit. He was wearing a rumpled jacket that looked 2 sizes too big and a tie stained with coffee. He carried a battered file folder and looked as if he had not slept in 3 days. He was a public defender. Blake looked at him with disdain. "Who are you?" Blake sneered. "Where is Silverman? I called Silverman." The public defender sighed and sat on the stool opposite the bench. He threw the file onto the small metal table bolted to the floor. "Silverman is not coming." "Mr. Sterling," he said, his voice flat and bored. His office declined the call. "They said your retainer check bounced. Insufficient funds." "That is a lie," Blake spat. "It is a banking error. My father-in-law froze the accounts illegally." The public defender rubbed his eyes. "Look, I have 20 other cases tonight, so let us make this quick. My name is Miller. I am appointed by the court to represent indigent defendants. And that is you." He opened the file. "You are facing a laundry list of charges, Mr. Sterling. Grand larceny, insurance fraud, conspiracy to commit murder, assault, forgery. The federal guys are also interested in you regarding some interstate transport of stolen goods. You are looking at 20 to life minimum." Blake turned pale. "Get me a real lawyer. I can pay. I have assets. The house." Miller pulled a document from the bottom of the file and slid it across the table. "You have nothing," he said. "This was just filed electronically. It is a petition for divorce." Blake stared at the paper. It was titled, "Nia Carter versus Blake Sterling." "Your wife is suing for divorce," Miller explained. "And she has an emergency injunction freezing any marital assets you thought you had. She has presented evidence of infidelity, abuse, and financial fraud. Under the terms of your prenup, which was apparently filed with the court an hour ago, you leave with what you came in with. 0. Blake reached for the paper, his hand shaking. He read the words, but his mind refused to accept them. Nia. His Nia. The woman he had broken. The woman he had enslaved. She was not just leaving him, she was burying him. "She cannot do this," he whispered. "She needs me. She is nothing without me." "She seems to be doing fine," Miller said, gathering his papers. "She retained the most expensive firm in the city. They sent over a discovery package that is 3 inches thick. They have everything, Mr. Sterling. Emails, texts, bank transfers, video surveillance. They have you dead to rights." Blake looked up, his eyes wide with terror. "So what do I do?" You have to get me out on bail. Miller stood up. Bail is set at $5 million cash given the flight risk and the severity of the charges. Unless you have $5 million hidden in your shoe, you are staying here until trial. He turned to the door. I suggest you get comfortable, and I suggest you stop screaming. The guards do not like it, and neither do the other guests. Miller knocked on the door and was let out, leaving Blake alone with the ruin of his life. The divorce papers lay on the table, a white flag of surrender he had been forced to wave. He was not a millionaire. He was not a husband. He was an inmate. The silence in the cell was heavier now. Blake sat with his head in his hands, the reality of his situation settling over him like a shroud. He was alone. He was broke. And he was trapped. But he was not entirely alone. A movement from the top bunk caught his eye. A shadow detached itself from the wall. The man who had been sleeping there sat up. He was massive. His arms were the size of tree trunks covered in tattoos that faded into the darkness of his skin. He wore the orange jumpsuit of the county jail, but on him it looked like a warning label. He swung his legs over the side of the bunk and dropped to the floor. The impact shook the cell. He stood up, towering over Blake, who was still sitting on the bench. The man did not say a word at first. He just looked at Blake. He looked at the stained tuxedo. He looked at the broken arm. He looked at the divorce papers on the table. Blake shrank back, pressing himself against the cold cinder block wall. "Hey," he said, his voice trembling. "I do not want any trouble. I am just passing through." The man took a step closer. He smelled of old iron and violence. He reached out a hand that looked like a shovel and picked up the divorce papers. He read the header, slowly moving his lips. Nia Carter. The man read his voice, a deep rumble that seemed to come from the earth itself. Versus Blake Sterling. He looked at Blake. Assault, he read. Domestic abuse. He dropped the paper. It fluttered to the floor, landing next to Blake's expensive shoes. "I heard you screaming earlier," the man said. "You said you own everything. You said you are a big man." "I am," Blake stammered. "I mean, I was. It is a misunderstanding." The man took another step. He was close enough now that Blake could see the scar running down his cheek. "My mother cleaned houses for a living," the man said softly. "She worked her hands to the bone. My stepfather used to hit her. He used to take her money and drink it away. He used to make her feel small so he could feel big." Blake tried to stand up to run to the bars and scream for the guard, but his legs would not work. "I hate men who hit women," the man said. "I hate men who steal from women. I hate men who think a suit makes them tough." He cracked his knuckles. The sound was loud in the small space. "Word travels fast in here," the man continued. "We heard about the lady in the blue dress. We heard about the wine. We heard about what you did to her eye." Blake's eyes widened. "How? How do you know that?" "We have TVs in the day room," the man said. "Your mother-in-law is famous. She is streaming right now. She is telling the whole world what a coward you are." The man smiled. It was not a nice smile. "My mom hates your type," he said, "and I love my mom." Blake opened his mouth to scream, but the man was faster. He lunged. The heavy steel door of the cell block clanged shut at the end of the corridor, muffling the sound. It did not completely silence the scream, but it cut it off, turning it into a dull echo that faded into the night. I sat in my hotel suite, watching the security feed from the jail that Steinberg had legally obtained through a Freedom of Information request regarding the safety of the prisoner. I watched the door close. I watched the silence settle. I turned off the screen. Justice, I thought, is not always a gavel. Sometimes it is a room with no exit and a roommate who remembers his mother. I picked up the phone and called Nia. "It is done," I said. "Sleep well, Dad," she replied. And for the first time in 15 years I did. 6 months is a long time in the life of a house. It is enough time to strip the rot from the walls. It is enough time to tear up the floors where a coward walked. It is enough time to paint over the darkness with a coat of blinding, pristine white. I stood in the center of the main hall. The heavy velvet curtains that Crystal had loved so much were gone. In their place, sheer linen allowed the morning sun to flood the room. The dark, oppressive furniture Blake had bought to look like an English lord had been dragged into the courtyard and chopped into kindling. We did not donate it. I do not donate bad luck. We burned it. I watched through the French doors as the landscaping crew finished planting the last of the new rose bushes. Beatrice's garden was back. It was younger and smaller, but it was alive. The soil that had been turned by my angry hands 6 months ago was now nurturing life instead of hiding secrets. The renovation was not just cosmetic, it was an exorcism. Every room where Nia had been abused was gutted. The kitchen where she had been burned was ripped out down to the studs. We installed a chef's kitchen not for servants but for a family that cooks together. The wine cellar where she had been imprisoned was filled with concrete. It is no longer a room. It is a foundation. A solid block of stone that can never be used as a cage again. I walked to the fireplace. It was the only original feature we kept. The fire was crackling, feeding on the last remnants of Blake Sterling's existence. His vanity portraits, his fake diplomas, his collection of cigars. They all went into the flames, turning into gray smoke that drifted up the chimney and vanished into the cold air. I heard footsteps behind me. They were not the shuffling steps of a broken woman in oversized shoes. They were the confident rhythmic clicks of heels on marble. I turned around. Nia walked into the room. She was holding a tablet and a stack of files. She wore a cream-colored suit that fit her perfectly. Her hair was braided in an intricate crown atop her head. The patch over her left eye was gone, replaced by a prosthetic that matched her natural gaze so perfectly you had to look twice to know it wasn't real. But she didn't hide it. She wore her scars like medals. "Dad," she said, smiling. "The contractor is asking about the gazebo. Do we want the cedar or the teak?" "Teak," I said. "It lasts longer." She made a note on her tablet. "Good. I prefer the teak. It matches the new deck at the shelter." The shelter. That was her empire now. We had taken the money recovered from Blake's fraud and the insurance payout from Crystal's theft, and we had poured it into the Carter Foundation. Nia was the director. She didn't just sign checks, she was in the trenches. She worked with women who had been financially abused. She helped them decode bank statements. She helped them find lawyers. She helped them reclaim their names. She was terrifyingly efficient. I watched her work sometimes. I watched her listen to a sobbing woman and then calmly hand her a tissue and a battle plan. She had taken her pain and forged it into a weapon for others. She was no longer the victim. She was the avenger. "You look tired," I said, noticing the slight shadow under her good eye. "I am energized," she corrected. "We just secured housing for 3 families in the city, and Steinberg tells me the lawsuit against the bank that facilitated Blake's fraud is moving forward. We are going to win a settlement that will fund the foundation for a decade." She walked over to the table and poured herself a glass of water. Her hand was steady. The burn scars were still there, faint silvery lines on her skin, but she didn't hide them. She looked at them often as a reminder of what she had survived. "Steinberg is here," she said, looking out the window. I followed her gaze. A black sedan was pulling up the driveway. Steinberg stepped out holding a single thick envelope. He didn't look happy. He looked like a man carrying a bomb. He walked into the house, nodding to Nia. "Desmond, Nia," he said. "What is it?" I asked. "Is it the appeal?" "No," Steinberg said. "The appeal was denied. Blake is serving his full 20 years. Crystal took a plea deal and is doing 10 in federal. This is not legal. This is personal." He held out the envelope. It was gray, stamped with the seal of the state penitentiary. The handwriting on the front was jagged and desperate. It was addressed to Nia. "It arrived at my office this morning," Steinberg explained. "It went through the prison censors. He is requesting a visitation. He says he has information. He says he wants to explain why he did it. He says he wants closure." I took the envelope. It felt heavy in my hand, not because of the paper, but because of the misery it contained. I looked at Nia. Her face had gone still. The smile was gone, replaced by that cold clarity I had seen the night of the gala. "You do not have to read this," I said. "I can burn it. I can shred it. You never have to know he wrote it." Nia looked at the envelope in my hand. She looked at the handwriting that used to sign her birthday cards, the handwriting that had signed her into slavery. "Give it to me," she said. I hesitated. I wanted to protect her. I wanted to shield her from his voice, even from his written words. But I remembered the lesson of the last 6 months. She did not need protection. She needed agency. I handed her the letter. She took it. She held it for a moment, feeling the texture of the cheap prison paper. She looked at the return address. Inmate 098234. Blake Sterling. She did not open it. She did not tear the seal. She did not look for a letter opener. She walked to the fireplace. The flames were dancing orange and yellow, hungry for fuel. She stood there for a long moment, watching the fire. "He wants to explain," she said softly. "He wants to tell me that he had a hard childhood. He wants to tell me that he loved me in his own way. He wants to plant a seed of doubt in my head. He wants to occupy space in my mind. She turned to me. He thinks I am still the girl who waits for him to tell me what is real. He thinks I need his version of the story to make sense of my life. She turned back to the fire. My life makes sense now, she said. The math finally adds up. She tossed the envelope into the fire. It landed on a burning log. The paper curled, instantly browning at the edges. The seal melted. The handwriting blackened and vanished. For a second, the envelope flared up, bright and hot, illuminating Nia's face. She watched it burn. She watched until it was nothing but gray ash, indistinguishable from the wood and the trash. Ash belongs with ash, she said. She dusted her hands off as if she had touched something dirty. She turned back to us. Her eyes were bright. Her shoulders were square. Now she said, picking up her tablet, "About that gazebo. I think we should put it near the pond. It will be a nice place for the women to sit and think." Steinberg smiled. I smiled. The ghost of Blake Sterling had tried to enter the house one last time. And Nia had not just closed the door, she had walled it up. We went back to work. There were contracts to sign. There were lives to save. The past was in the fireplace, turning into cold dust. The future was standing in the sunlight, wearing a cream suit and planting a garden. And I knew then that we had won, not just the war, we had won the peace. I sat on the limestone balcony overlooking the garden my wife Beatrice had planted so many years ago. The sun was setting, casting long golden rays across the lawn, turning the white roses into clusters of light. Down near the fountain, Nia was laughing. She was walking with Lucy, the new shelter director, discussing plans for the upcoming charity gala. It was a sound I had not heard in 15 years. It was a sound I thought had been extinguished forever, buried under layers of trauma and chemicals. Hearing it now felt like breathing for the first time after holding my breath underwater. It was sweet, it was pure, but it also carried a sharp edge of pain. I looked at my hands resting on the stone balustrade. They were still strong, but they were older now. The skin was thinner, the veins more prominent. I had spent a decade and a half in the mines of Africa eating dust and sleeping with one eye open to build this empire. I had missed her first heartbreak. I had missed her graduation. I had missed the moment she fell into the trap of a predator because I wasn't there to warn her. People say time is money. They are wrong. Money is infinite. You can lose it and make it back. You can burn it and print more. Time is the only finite resource. Time is the only thing you can never buy. I looked at the checkbook sitting on the table beside my tea. I had spent millions in the last 6 months. I had bought debt. I had bought lawyers. I had bought silence, and I had bought noise. I had used my fortune like a sledgehammer to smash the walls of my daughter's prison. Was it worth it? I watched Nia tilt her head back and smile at something Lucy said. I saw the way she stood tall, her spine straight, her eyes clear. I saw the woman she was becoming, the woman she was always meant to be before Blake Sterling tried to erase her. Yes, it was worth every cent. It was worth every lonely night in the jungle. It was worth every drop of sweat. Because while money cannot buy back the past, it can certainly purchase justice. It can buy a second chance. It can buy the peace necessary to heal. I picked up the tablet Steinberg had left for me. He had a morbid sense of humor, my lawyer. He knew I liked to keep an eye on my investments, and Blake Sterling was currently my worst performing asset. I tapped the screen, bringing up the feed from the correctional facility. It was not a live feed, but a recorded clip Steinberg had procured from his contacts. Blake was in the latrine duty block. He was on his knees. He wore a gray jumpsuit that hung off his frame like a sack. He had lost 50 pounds in 6 months. His hair, which he used to style with $20 gel, was shaved close to his skull, revealing the scalp beneath. He looked 20 years older. The arrogance was gone. The vanity was gone. He was scrubbing a stainless steel toilet with a small brush. His movements were slow and robotic. A guard walked by and tapped his baton on the bars. Blake flinched. He cringed like a beaten dog. He looked at the floor, terrified to make eye contact. This was the man who had screamed at my daughter for missing a spot on the driveway. This was the man who had thrown money at me and called me a beggar. Now he was the one scrubbing filth. Now he was the one living in fear. The universe has a sense of humor, and it is brutal. I swiped the screen. The next image was a photo taken by a paparazzi who had followed the scandal. It showed a highway median in the rain. A group of people in bright orange vests were picking up trash with claw sticks. In the center was Crystal. She was not wearing silver. She was not wearing diamonds. She was wearing muddy boots and a plastic poncho. Her hair was frizzy, plastered to her face by the rain. She was spearing a discarded fast food wrapper. A luxury car was driving past in the background, splashing muddy water onto her legs. She looked miserable. She looked invisible. She was finally getting the attention she deserved from the world. None. They were where they belonged. They were in the mud. They were in the cage. They were living the lives they had tried to force upon my daughter. It was not revenge. It was a correction. It was the market value of their souls adjusting to zero. I turned off the tablet. I did not need to see them anymore. They were ghosts. They were dust. They were the past. I picked up my cup of tea. It was Earl Grey, hot and strong, just the way Beatrice used to make it. I took a sip, letting the warmth spread through my chest. The evening air was cooling down, carrying the scent of the ocean and the roses. I looked directly into the lens of the security camera mounted on the wall. I knew that somewhere in a data center this footage was being archived. I knew that someday someone might watch this. Listen to me, I said, my voice low and steady. The world will try to tell you what you are worth. They will look at your clothes and tell you that you are poor. They will look at your skin and tell you that you are weak. They will look at your kindness and tell you that you are foolish. People like Blake Sterling exist in every office, in every neighborhood, in every family. They are vampires. They feed on your doubt. They feed on your silence. They think that because they are loud, they are strong. They think that because they take, they are winners. Do not believe them. Never let another human being set the price of your dignity. Never let them tell you where you belong. Never let them sign your name to a life you did not choose. And if they try, if they come for your family, if they try to steal your mind or your home or your peace, do not argue. Do not beg. Do not scream. Work in the dark. Build your fortress. Sharpen your shears. Wait until they think they have won. Wait until they are standing on the stage laughing at your expense. Then buy the stage, buy the lights, buy the power company that runs the building. I took another sip of tea. I looked at Nia one last time. She was walking back toward the house. She looked up at the balcony and waved. I waved back. Buy their life, I whispered, and tear it apart. I turned away from the camera. The sun dipped below the horizon. The screen faded to black. The story was over. The work was done. True power is never loud. It is the quiet, unshakable knowledge of your own worth. Blake Sterling believed power was a tuxedo and a title, but he learned too late that a castle built on the tears of others will always crumble. We must never confuse silence with weakness, nor patience with surrender. The most valuable currency in this life is not the money in your bank account, but the dignity in your soul. If someone demands you shrink to fit their small world, do not argue. Simply outgrow them, buy the building, and evict them from your life. If you believe that dignity is non-negotiable, hit that like button and subscribe. Share your story in the comments. I read every single one. Until next time.